Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The dream, for as long as he could truly remember, had been a simple one. A quiet picture painted in the gentle colors of solitude and peace, a vision of a place that belonged entirely to him, a refuge from the endless, grinding noise and the demanding pace of other people's expectations. For Thomas, this dream took the very specific shape of a farm. Not a grand estate or a vast plantation, but a humble piece of land, a tract of earth he could call his own, where the morning chorus would be sung by birds and not by the shouts of foremen, and where the only schedule that mattered was the turning of the seasons and the needs of the creatures under his care. He had held on to this image through years of back-breaking labor, through days that started before the sun had even considered rising and ended long after it had retreated from the sky, through work that left his muscles aching and his hands rough and calloused. Every coin he earned was not spent on fleeting pleasures or fine clothes. Each copper and silver piece was instead a single brick in the foundation of this future paradise, carefully saved and guarded, the physical manifestation of his hope. The goal was everything, the singular light at the end of a very long, very dark tunnel, and he walked toward it with a determination that shut out all other distractions. The moment he saw the notice, pinned to the community board outside the dusty general store, he felt a jolt, a strange and certain feeling deep in his chest that this was it, that the long wait was finally over. The paper is weathered, its edges curled and yellowed by the sun, the ink of the writing slightly blurred as if by a passing rain shower. It advertised a farm for sale, its description brief and to the point, but it was the price listed that made his heart hammer against his ribs. It was unbelievably, almost suspiciously low, a fraction of what such a property should cost, a number so small he had to read it 3 times to be sure his eyes were not playing a cruel trick on him. A wave of panic, followed by a surge of desperate excitement, washed over him. Someone else would see it. Someone with quicker feet and a fuller purse would snatch this miracle away from him. He acted not with cautious deliberation, but with the frantic speed of a man catching a falling precious vase. The money, his entire life savings, a heavy and significant weight in a leather pouch, was transferred to the hands of a bored-looking land agent in a matter of hours. The papers were signed with a trembling hand, and, just like that, the dream was no longer a picture in his mind. It was a deed, a legal fact, a place that existed on a map with his name now attached to it. He did not bother to visit it first. The price was proof enough that it must need significant work, and he was no stranger to hard work. He could fix a leaky roof. He could mend a broken fence. He could till poor soil until it became rich. The challenges did not scare him. They excited him. They were his challenges now. The journey to his new property felt different from any travel he had ever undertaken. The road seemed smoother, the sky a more brilliant blue, and the very air tasted sweeter, filled with the promise of things to come. He carried all his worldly possessions in a single knapsack on his back, a small price to pay for the immense fortune of ownership that awaited him. When he finally reached the gate, marked by a wooden post with the assigned plot number carved into it, he stopped dead in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. This was not the struggling, neglected plot he had braced himself for. This was perfection. The fields that rolled out before him were a lush, vibrant green, swaying gently in the breeze as if welcoming him home. The fences were straight and strong, not a single post out of place. The barn in the distance was a masterpiece of rustic construction, its wood weathered to a silvery gray, but looking stout and immovable. And the farmhouse itself, nestled in a grove of ancient, shading oak trees, was charming and cozy, with smoke curling from its chimney, suggesting a warmth and readiness he had never dared to hope for. It was not just a farm. It was a postcard, a painting, a paradise that exceeded his grandest fantasies. A laugh of pure, unadulterated joy escaped his lips. He had done it. Against all odds, through all the years of sacrifice, he had actually done it. He walked up the path, his boots crunching on the gravel, his eyes drinking in every perfect detail. The prolific vegetable garden bursting with ripe tomatoes and deep green vines, the orchard heavy with fruit, the contented clucking of chickens from a clean coop. It was all so quiet, so serene, so exactly right. He was just a few feet from the front porch, already picturing himself rocking in a chair there in the evenings, when the front door of the farmhouse creaked open. His first thought was one of confusion. Had the previous owner not yet moved out? Had the land agent made a terrible mistake? But the figures that emerged from the doorway one by one drove all such practical thoughts from his mind, replacing them with a stunned, disbelieving awe that rooted him to the spot. They were women, but women unlike any he had ever seen or even heard of in tales. They were giants. Each one was taller than the doorframe itself, having to stoop slightly to step outside onto the porch. They were dressed in simple, homespun dresses the color of the earth and the sky, and they moved with a slow, graceful gravity that seemed to calm the very air around them. The first and tallest had long hair the pale gold of a wheat field at harvest time, and her eyes were a calm and steady brown. The second had hair the rich, dark brown of freshly turned soil, and a gentle smile played on her lips. The third had eyes of a startling, clear blue, like a summer sky, and her expression was more serious, more intent, as she studied him. There was a long silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the oak trees. Thomas could only stare, his mind completely unable to process what he was seeing. The tallest woman was the first to speak, and her voice, when it came, was not a booming roar as one might expect from a giant, but a low, melodic rumble, like distant, gentle thunder on a warm afternoon. "Welcome, Thomas," she said, and the sound of his name in her mouth was both comforting and deeply unsettling. "We have been waiting for you." The second woman nodded, her smile widening just a fraction. "This is our home," she said, her tone warm but firm, leaving no room for argument. "We have cared for it for a long time." Thomas finally found his voice, though it came out as a faint, confused croak. I'm sorry. There must be some mistake. I've just bought this farm." The agent, he said it was empty. It was then that the third woman, the one with the sky-blue eyes, took a single step forward. Her gaze was direct, unwavering, and held a weight of ancient knowledge that made Thomas feel very small and very young. She looked him up and down, and then she spoke the words that would shatter his understanding of the world and turn his perfect dream into a bewildering puzzle. "You're going to have sex with us," she said. The statement was delivered not with menace, not with passion, but with a simple, matter-of-fact certainty, as if she were commenting on the weather or the state of the crops. For Thomas, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The beautiful farm, the golden sunlight, the idyllic peace, it all receded into a blur. He could only stand there, his face flushing a deep, hot red, his mind utterly blank except for the echoing, impossible words. This was not the welcome he had imagined. This was not the beginning he had worked for. This was something else entirely, something old and strange and terrifying, and he was trapped right in the middle of it. The silence that followed the third woman's declaration was not merely an absence of sound. It was a thick, heavy substance that filled the space between Thomas and the three giants, pressing in on his eardrums and making the cheerful chirping of the birds in the oak trees sound like it was coming from a world far, far away. His mind, which had been moments ago soaring on the wings of triumphant joy, now felt like a shattered pane of glass, each fragment reflecting a different shard of confusion, fear, and profound embarrassment. The words, "You're going to have sex with us," seemed to hang in the air, visible and solid, a bizarre and impossible sentence that refused to be unsaid or rationalized away. He stared at them, his mouth slightly agape, his body frozen in a posture of halted progress, one foot still slightly raised, as if he had been interrupted mid-step on his journey to a future that had just vanished before his eyes. The women did not move. They simply watched him, their expressions a mixture of patience and that same unshakable certainty, as if they had just informed him that rain was forecasted for the afternoon, and he should probably fetch his coat. It was the tallest of them, the one with the hair like ripened wheat, who finally broke the terrible, stretching silence. Her voice, that low, melodic rumble, was gentle, but it held an undeniable weight of authority, the authority of something ancient and deeply rooted. "You are in shock," she observed, and it was the most ordinary, understandable thing anyone had said since he arrived. "This is not the greeting you expected. Please come inside. The sun is warm, and confusion is best addressed sitting down, with a cup of tea to steady the hands and the mind." She gestured with a hand that was large enough to cradle his entire head, yet the movement was graceful, almost delicate. Numbly, without any conscious decision to obey, Thomas found his feet moving, carrying him up the steps of the porch and through the oversized front door into the cool dimness of the farmhouse's main room. Everything inside was built on a scale that was both awe-inspiring and deeply disorienting. The ceiling soared high above him, the wooden beams massive and dark. The fireplace was a great stone mouth that looked capable of swallowing a whole tree trunk. The table they led him to was a vast plateau of polished oak, and the chair they pulled out for him was so tall his feet dangled a good foot from the floorboards, making him feel like a child again. The woman with the soil-brown hair, whose name he would learn was Kayla, moved to the hearth where a kettle was already steaming, its quiet whistle now the only sound in the room. She prepared tea in an earthenware mug that looked like a small basin in her hands, but was comically large in his. She placed it before him, the scent of chamomile and honey rising in the steam. "Drink," she encouraged softly. "It will help." Thomas wrapped his hands around the warm mug, the heat seeping into his cold fingers. He took a sip, the sweet, floral liquid doing little to calm the storm in his mind, but providing a small point of focus in the overwhelming strangeness of it all. The three giants settled themselves around the table on benches that groaned softly under their weight. They waited, allowing him this moment of small, mundane comfort. It was Alara, the tallest, who began to speak, her voice filling the large room like a foundational hum. "You believe you have stumbled into madness," she said, and her tone was not unkind. "But you have stumbled into history, into a story that began long before you were born, long before your grandfather's grandfather drew his first breath. This land was not always as you see it now. Generations ago, a blight fell upon it. The soil turned pale and lifeless, refusing to nurture even the hardiest weed. The rains ceased to fall, and the sun beat down with a cruel, scorching heat. The animals grew thin and listless, and the farmer who worked this land, a man consumed by despair, watched his family's future wither and die before his eyes. He had tried everything his hands and his knowledge could devise, and nothing had worked. One evening, as the dying sun bled red across a barren field, he fell to his knees and offered up a prayer not just to God, but to the land itself, to the spirit of the place. He promised anything, everything, if only the life would return. She paused, and Lyra, the one with the piercing blue eyes, took up the tale, her voice clearer, sharper, like the ring of a chisel on stone. The land heard him. It heard his genuine despair and his selfless offer. Deep forces, old and slumbering, stirred. The essential spirits of this place, the spirit of the sun that gives warmth and growth, the spirit of the soil that provides foundation and nourishment, and the spirit of the rain that grants life and cleansing, awoke. They could not show themselves as formless energies. They needed a voice, a presence to interact with the world of men. And so they took form. They chose the form of women, for women are creators and nurturers, and they made themselves large, for their power was vast and their purpose was immense. They appeared before the farmer, just as we appeared before you today. Kayla spoke next, her tone warmer, earthier, as if she were explaining the simple fact of a seed sprouting. "We made a covenant with him, a binding, magical promise. We, the guardians, would pour our essence into this land. We would ensure its fertility, its health, its boundless abundance. The sun would always shine favorably. The soil would always be rich. The rains would always come in their season. The farm would become a haven of plenty, protected from the droughts and famines that afflicted others. But magic requires balance. A gift of this magnitude requires a reciprocal bond. It cannot be a one-sided transaction. The land must know its master, and the master must give a part of his own life force, his own essence, to the land to seal the pact, to tell the magic that a new steward has arrived and the covenant is renewed. Alara leaned forward slightly, her large, calm eyes fixed on Thomas. The joining, the act you find so shocking, is that renewal is not about personal desire, is the oldest, most fundamental language of life and connection that exists. It is the same principle that binds a bee to a flower, creating fruit. It is the same energy that pushes a root through the soil toward water. It is a sacred ritual, a transfer of essence, a way for your vitality to flow into the land and for the land's magic to recognize you as its own. It is how the promise is sealed. It is how the balance is maintained. She gestured around the room, at the solid walls and beyond them to the thriving fields. This perfection you saw, this paradise you thought you had bought for a handful of coins, is the fruit of that covenant. It exists only because of this promise, renewed by each owner who has come to this farm across the long, long years. You did not just purchase property, Thomas. You inherited a duty. You stepped into a story that is now asking you to write your chapter. The weight of her words, of the immense history and responsibility they conveyed, settled over Thomas, feeling heavier than any sack of grain he had ever carried. The simple dream of a quiet farm was gone, replaced by an ancient, magical, and terrifying reality. The silence in the wake of their explanation was a different creature entirely from the shocked stillness that had preceded it. That first silence had been a void, a blank emptiness of pure, uncomprehending astonishment. This new silence was thick, heavy, and fertile, pregnant with the weight of centuries and the immensity of the choice that now lay before him. A choice so vast and strange it seemed to dwarf him, to make him feel smaller than he had even when his feet dangled from the giant chair. He sat there, cradling the enormous mug of tea in his hands, its warmth a tiny, fleeting comfort against the cold enormity of the decision he now faced. The steam rising from the liquid seemed to carry the echoes of their words: covenant, guardians, essence, renewal. Words that belonged in old tales told by firelight, not in the solid, sunlit reality of a farmhouse kitchen. He could feel the eyes of the three women upon him, not with impatience or demand, but with a watchful, ancient patience, as if they had waited through generations and could wait a little longer for his soul to catch up with his circumstances. Finally, without a word, he slid down from the chair, his boots making a soft thud on the wide-planked wooden floor. He needed to be alone. He needed space to breathe air that wasn't shared with these living legends, to think thoughts that weren't shaped by their overwhelming reality. I need to walk," he said, his voice sounding thin and reedy in the large room. Alara, the tall one, simply nodded, her expression one of deep understanding. "The land is yours to walk, Thomas," she said, and the phrase yours now seemed to carry a meaning so profound it was almost terrifying. He turned and walked out of the farmhouse, stepping from the dim, history-filled interior back into the brilliant sunshine of his perfect, purchased prison. The afternoon sun was warm on his shoulders as he began to walk, his steps carrying him aimlessly at first, down the neat gravel path, and then onto the soft, lush grass of the pasture. His mind was a churning whirlpool, pulling in every detail around him and spinning it against the story he had just been told. He looked at the apple trees in the orchard, each branch bent low under the weight of perfect, unblemished fruit, their red and green skins gleaming like jewels. Was this the work of the spirit of the sun? He knelt and scooped up a handful of the dark, rich soil from the vegetable garden, letting it run through his fingers. It was cool and crumbly, teeming with tiny life, smelling profoundly of growth and decay and fertility. Was this the gift of the spirit of the soil? He listened to the gentle whisper of the wind through the leaves of the great oak trees, a sound that seemed to carry a promise of coming rain even under the clear blue sky. Was that the breath of the spirit of the rain? He walked for what felt like hours, his path taking him along the strong, straight fences, past the barn where contented cows lowed softly, past the coop where plump chickens pecked at the ground without a care in the world. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of impossible abundance, of a harmony with nature that no mere human farmer, no matter how skilled or hard-working, could ever achieve. This was magic, undeniable, breathtaking, and utterly real magic. And the price for it was a single, intimate, terrifying act. A transaction of essence, a sealing of a pact. The practical part of his mind, the part that had scrimped and saved and calculated for years, argued its case. He had spent everything he had. He had no other home, no other prospects. To walk away from this was to walk back into a life of grinding labor for others. To admit his dream was a failure, to be penniless and landless. All he had to do was say yes to this one strange thing, and all of this paradise, would be his. The logic was cold, hard, and inescapable. But another voice, quieter but deeper, spoke from a place within him that had nothing to do with coins or deeds or security. This voice spoke of things like autonomy and intimacy and the sanctity of one's own body. It whispered that such a thing should not be a transaction, a duty, a term of a magical contract. It argued that a true bond, whether with a person or, he supposed, with a piece of enchanted land, should be built on a foundation of mutual respect, of trust that was earned, of affection that grew slowly and naturally over time, like a strong oak from a tiny acorn. This thing they asked of him, no matter how sacred they framed it, felt like a demand. It felt like a key being presented to him with the instruction to unlock a door he wasn't sure he wanted to open. He thought of love, or at least of the idea of it, something that was supposed to be freely given and received, a choice made by the heart, not a requirement listed in the fine print of a magical covenant. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, he found himself back near the farmhouse, standing at the edge of the miraculously productive vegetable garden. He looked at the farmhouse, seeing the soft glow of lantern light beginning to shine from its windows. Inside were three beings of immense power and ancient purpose, waiting for his answer. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the sweet, fertile air of this magical land. He had made his decision. It was not a decision of logic, nor was it one of fear. It was a decision that came from the very core of who he was, from the principles that had guided him through his years of honest labor. He walked back to the house, his steps slower now but surer. He climbed the porch steps and found them waiting for him just inside the door, their expressions calm but expectant. He looked at each of them in turn, at Alara with her patient strength, at Kayla with her nurturing warmth, at Lyra with her piercing clarity. "I have thought about your words," he began, his voice firmer now, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. "And I have looked at this beautiful land you protect. I believe your story. I see the truth of it in every leaf and every blade of grass." He took another steadying breath. "But I cannot do what you ask. Not like this. It does not feel right in my heart. A bond, a true bond, should be built on trust, on time, on friendship. It cannot be demanded on the first day as a condition of a deal. I am willing to stay. I am willing to work. I am willing to learn. But I cannot. I will not agree to this. Not now." He waited, half expecting the sky to fall, for the earth to open up and swallow him for his defiance. He had just refused a direct request from three ancient spirits. He had potentially thrown away his entire future. But he stood his ground, his own integrity, the only thing he felt he truly owned in that moment. The silence that met Thomas's declaration was profound, but it was not the angry, thunderous silence he had instinctively braced himself for. There was no flash of lightning from the clear evening sky, no tremor in the solid floorboards beneath his feet. Instead, the three giant women simply looked at him, and in their large, expressive eyes, he saw not wrath, but something far more complex and unsettling. A deep, weary sorrow, a flicker of concern, and a patience that felt as deep and immutable as the bedrock beneath the farm. Alara, the tallest, finally nodded, a slow, grave dip of her head that seemed to acknowledge the weight of his choice rather than condemn it. "The covenant is a choice," she said, her voice a low hum that vibrated in the quiet air. It has always been a choice. The land will respond to your decision, as it must. It is its nature. There was no threat in her tone, only a simple, solemn statement of fact, like a farmer noting that a lack of water would cause a plant to wilt. With that, they turned and moved further into the house, leaving him standing alone in the doorway, the mantle of their disappointment and the immense weight of his own uncertainty settling upon his shoulders. The following morning, Thomas awoke with a determined energy. The decision was made. He would prove that hard work and dedication could be enough. He would show them, and himself, that he could earn his place here through the sweat of his brow and the strength of his back, not through a mystical transaction he couldn't reconcile with his conscience. The dawn light was just beginning to paint the sky a soft pearl gray as he marched out to the barn, a sense of purpose fueling his steps. He found the milking pail exactly where it should be, a familiar, solid object in this world of unsettling magic. He approached the dairy cow, a beautiful, placid creature with a sleek brown coat and large, liquid eyes. He spoke to her softly, as he had seen Kayla do the previous day, and settled on the stool beside her. But as his hands touched her udder, a frown creased his forehead. It was slack, empty. He tried again, his movements practiced and gentle, but not a single drop of milk wet the pale, shiny surface. The cow lowed softly, a sound that seemed less like contentment and more like confusion, and swished her tail, nudging him away as if he were a bothersome fly. Puzzled, but undeterred, he left the pail and moved on to the henhouse. The scene there was the same. The hens, usually bustling and clucking, moving in their busy, pecking way, were instead quiet and still. They sat perched on their roosts or huddled in the corners of the coop, their feathers fluffed up as if they were cold, though the morning air was mild. He reached beneath one, then another, his fingers searching for the warm, smooth shape of a newly laid egg. He found nothing. The nesting boxes were empty, filled only with clean, fresh straw. A prickle of unease traced its way down his spine. This was no coincidence. Shaking his head, trying to dismiss the growing sense of dread, he decided his most important task was to draw water for the day. He headed for the well, its stone circle a familiar landmark. The bucket descended with its usual rasping creak, and he heard the splash as it hit the water below. He began to haul it back up, the rope rough against his palms. But the weight was wrong. It was too light. As the bucket emerged into the morning light, his heart sank. The water within was not clear and cool. It was a murky, opaque brown, thick with silt and mud, completely undrinkable. He stared into the bucket, and the reflection that stared back at him was pale and troubled. He dropped the bucket and walked numbly toward the fields, the centerpiece of the farm's incredible abundance. And that was where the true chill of understanding finally seized him. A thin, eerie mist clung to the ground, a mist that had not been there the evening before, a mist that felt cold and damp despite the rising sun. The plants, which yesterday had stood tall and vibrant, bursting with health, now looked uncertain. The corn stalks seemed less rigid, their leaves slightly curled and drooping. The vibrant green of the potato plants seemed faded, washed out. The entire vast field seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. It wasn't a scene of dramatic death or decay, not yet. It was something subtler and more frightening. It was a hesitation. It was the land itself pausing, its vitality receding, pulling back like a tide going out, unsure of its connection to the new figure walking upon it. It was there, standing in the middle of the faltering field, that Alara found him. She moved through the mist with an ethereal grace, her large form seeming to blend with the hazy air. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not need to. Her presence alone was a testament to the truth of her words. She stood beside him, looking out over the once perfect fields that now seemed to be fading before their very eyes. "The land is unsure," she said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper that was absorbed by the thick air. "It does not feel your commitment. It does not feel the bond that tells it to provide, to nurture, to grow. It is a partnership, Thomas. It requires both parties to give. We have given for generations. Now it waits for you. Without that connection, the magic that sustains it fades. Thomas wrapped his arms around himself, a sudden coldness that had nothing to do with the mist seeping into his bones. He had been so concerned with the principle of the thing, with his own personal feelings, that he had not truly, deeply considered the consequences. His defiance wasn't just a personal choice. It was a rejection that had a direct, visible, and devastating effect on the very paradise he had wanted to call home. He had wanted to prove that hard work was enough. But as he looked at the muddy water, the empty henhouse, and the faltering fields, he was forced to confront a terrifying possibility, that in this place, with this ancient magic, it might not be. The sight of the faltering field, the feel of the listless mist clinging to his clothes, and the profound truth in Alara's quiet words struck Thomas with the force of a physical blow. The reality of the situation was no longer a philosophical debate about principles and personal boundaries. It was a tangible decay, a visible unraveling of the very fabric of the world he had invested his entire life in obtaining. He had made his stand on the hill of his own integrity, but from that height, he could now see the valley below beginning to wither, and the view filled him with a deep, chilling remorse. His defiance, however righteous it had felt the night before, now seemed like the act of a petulant child refusing to water a garden because he disagreed with the design of the watering can. The garden did not care about his disagreement. It only knew it was thirsty. He looked from the drooping plants to Alara's patient, sorrowful face, and the anger and fear that had armored him began to crack and fall away, leaving behind only a raw and humbled understanding. He did not speak. There were no words adequate for the apology he felt brewing in his soul. Instead, he simply nodded, a slow, weary gesture of surrender not to them, but to the truth of the situation. He had been thinking like a man who had bought a piece of property. He needed to start thinking like a steward who had inherited a living, breathing entity with its own ancient needs and rhythms. He turned away from the field and walked back toward the farmhouse, his steps no longer those of a defiant owner, but of a chastened student. He found Kayla in the herb garden, her large, capable fingers gently pinching leaves from a plant that looked as weary as he felt. He stopped a few feet away, waiting for her to acknowledge him. "I was wrong," he said, the words simple and direct, stripped of all pretense. "I was thinking only of myself. I see now that my choice has consequences for this entire place. I don't understand your ways, and I cannot. I am not ready to agree to the covenant, but I am ready to learn. Will you teach me? Will you show me how to care for this land? Even without the magic? I will do the work. I will try to understand." Kayla turned, her dark soil-colored eyes studying him. The gentle smile that had been absent since his refusal returned, a small sun breaking through clouds. "Understanding is the first nutrient," she said, her voice warm. "The land feels intention. It may not be the full bond it requires, but it will feel the effort. That is a beginning." She gestured for him to follow her. "Come, the soil is worried. It needs to feel a caring touch." And so began Thomas's true education. He set aside his own preconceptions and his pride and became an apprentice. Kayla taught him to not just look at the soil, but to feel it. She showed him how to take a handful and let it crumble through his fingers, reading its moisture and its health by its texture and its smell. She explained how different plants nourish the earth and how others took from it, and the importance of balance. She had him work compost into the worried earth around the base of the plants, not as a chore, but as a meditation, a way of transmitting care through his fingertips. Lyra, the one with the sky-blue eyes, found him later that day, staring at the muddy water in the well bucket, wondering how he would provide drink for the animals. She did not magically clear the water. Instead, she taught him to listen. She stood with him at the well, and in the silence, she pointed out the subtle shift in the wind, the particular way the clouds were gathering on the distant horizon. "The wind speaks of rain before the sky darkens," she murmured. "The land is telling you it will provide water from the sky, if you are prepared to catch it." Together, they hauled every barrel and tub they could find from the barn. placing them strategically under the eaves of the buildings to collect the coming rainfall. Alara, too, began his lessons. She took him to the orchard where the fruit, while still on the trees, seemed less vibrant. She taught him to talk to the trees, not with words, but with his energy. She showed him how to carefully prop up a heavy branch weighed down with apples, explaining that this act of support was a language the tree understood. It knows it is not alone, she rumbled softly. It knows you see its burden and are helping to carry it. This is a form of bond, too. A slower, quieter one. Day bled into day. Thomas worked from sunup to sundown, but the work was different now. It was no longer about proving a point or accomplishing a task. It was about connection. He found himself speaking softly to the cow as he tried again to milk her, apologizing for his earlier confusion, patiently reassuring her. On the third morning of this new routine, a thin, warm stream of milk finally hit the empty pail. It wasn't the abundant flow from before, but it was something. It was an answer. He collected rainwater from the barrels and carefully watered the most distressed plants in the garden. He saw them, days later, uncurl their leaves slightly, a tiny response to his care. He ate meals with the giant women, and around the large table, they shared stories. He told them of his life of labor, of his dream for a quiet place of his own. They spoke of seasons that lasted decades, of farmers they had known across centuries, of watching the world change while their little pocket of land remained constant, sustained by the covenant. He stopped seeing them as terrifying spirits or demanding guardians. He began to see them as Alara, whose wisdom was as deep as her roots, Kayla, whose nurturing nature was as constant as the soil, and Lyra, whose clarity of purpose was as sharp and clean as a mountain rain. He began to care for them. The fear was replaced by a growing respect, and the respect, slowly and quietly, began to blossom into a genuine and profound affection. He was no longer an owner negotiating with strange tenants. He was a man, learning to love a place and its incredible, ancient protectors. The work was hard, but for the first time, it felt like he was building something real, not just claiming it. The change had been so gradual, so deeply woven into the fabric of his daily life, that Thomas did not mark a specific moment when it happened. It was not a single event, but a slow and gentle dawning, like the sun gradually illuminating a vast landscape, revealing colors and contours that had been hidden in the gloom. The initial shock and fear had been sanded away by the relentless, patient rhythm of shared work. The awkwardness had dissolved in the warm, lantern-lit glow of shared meals and quiet conversations that stretched into the evening. The three giant women were no longer abstract concepts, terrifying spirits, or demanding arbiters of a magical contract. They had become individuals to him, each with their own unique presence that filled his world with a richness he had never known was possible. Alara, with her profound, grounding wisdom that felt as ancient and solid as the bedrock itself. Kayla, with her boundless, nurturing warmth that made every small success feel like a celebration and every setback feel surmountable. And Lyra, with her sharp, clear insight that could cut through confusion and reveal the simple truth of a situation. He had come to know the subtle differences in their laughter, the particular way each of them looked at the horizon when deep in thought, the unique qualities of their kindness. One evening, after a long day spent with Kayla restoring a section of the herb garden that had been particularly faltering, they all sat together on the large porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast, velvety sky. The air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of turned earth and night-blooming flowers. The farm around them was not the bursting, almost overwhelming paradise of his first day, but it was stable. His diligent, caring work, guided by their teachings, had halted the decay. The land was holding its breath, waiting, but it was no longer fading. It was a fragile piece, hard-won through blistered hands and a humbled heart. As he sat there, listening to the soft sound of their breathing, a feeling of immense and overwhelming rightness settled over him. This was not about a deed or a price anymore. This was not about a magical transaction he didn't understand. This was about belonging. He belonged here with them. The thought of leaving, of this fragile, hard-won harmony dissolving, felt like a physical pain in his chest. He turned to look at them, their faces softened by the starlight, their large forms radiating a calm, protective energy that he realized he had come to rely on, to draw strength from. He thought of the covenant, not as a demand, but as they had always described it, a bond, a connection, a sacred promise. And he understood, with a clarity that finally felt earned and not imposed, that he wanted that bond. Not because he was afraid of the land dying, and not because he felt he had to fulfill a contract. He wanted it because he cared for them. He trusted them. He wanted to be truly, completely, and magically connected to them and to this place that had become his home in every sense that mattered. The act itself was no longer a terrifying, abstract requirement. It was the natural, physical expression of the commitment that had already grown in his heart. He took a deep, steadying breath, the air filling his lungs with the scent of the night and the presence of his friends. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet but clear, carrying in the still air with a newfound certainty. Alara, Kayla, Lyra. They turned to look at him, their starlit eyes reflecting the same calm attention they had always given him. When I first came here, he began, I heard your words, but I only understood the sound of them, not the meaning. I was afraid. I was proud. I thought I could earn this place with my 2 hands alone, and I was wrong. He paused, gathering the words that felt true. You have been patient with me. You have taught me more than just how to care for soil and plants and animals. You have taught me about balance, about respect, about the deep, quiet magic that comes from truly caring for something. He looked out at the sleeping fields, then back at them, his heart feeling too large for his chest. I see now that the covenant isn't a rule. It's an invitation. It's the deepest way to say I am here. I am part of this. I choose this. And I choose this. I choose you. I am ready to make the promise. Not because I have to, but because I want to with all that I am. The silence that followed was filled not with tension, but with a profound, resonant acceptance. Alara was the first to move, reaching out a large, gentle hand to rest it on his shoulder. The weight was comforting, a benediction. The land has heard your heart, Thomas, she murmured, her voice like the deep hum of the earth itself. It has been waiting. Lyra nodded, her blue eyes gleaming with what looked like approval. A choice made freely is the strongest magic of all, she said. Kayla's smile was a beautiful, radiant thing in the darkness. The bond is ready to be sealed. They rose together, and he followed them into the farmhouse, not with fear or trepidation, but with a sense of solemn joy. What followed was not an act of mere physicality, but a ritual of profound connection. It was gentle and patient, and filled with a reverence that transformed the ordinary into the sacred. It was the final, natural step in a journey of understanding, the physical language that gave voice to the commitment, trust, and genuine affection that had grown between them. It was, as they had always said, the way his life force flowed into the land, and their magic recognized him as their own. But for Thomas, it felt like something simpler and even more beautiful. It felt like coming home. Thomas awoke. It was not the slow, groggy awakening of most mornings, a reluctant return to consciousness from the depths of sleep. This was something entirely different. It was an emergence, a gentle but definite surfacing into a world that was fundamentally, radiantly new. The first thing he was aware of was not the light coming through the window or the sound of the birds, but a feeling. It was a sensation that began deep within his own chest, a warm, humming vibration, a steady and powerful pulse that was both his own heartbeat and something infinitely greater, a rhythm that seemed to sync perfectly with the very breathing of the world around him. He felt connected, not in the abstract way he had felt after weeks of hard work and growing friendship, but in a literal, tangible, magical way. It was as if a circuit long dormant had been completed, and now a current of pure, thrumming life flowed through him, from him, and back into him in a continuous, glorious loop. He could feel the farm. He lay there for a long moment, his eyes still closed, simply experiencing this new reality. He could feel the deep, patient strength of the soil beneath the house, its dark richness teeming with potential. He could feel the thirst of the roots of the great oak trees outside, a gentle pull that was answered by a faint, gathering moisture deep in the earth. He could feel the sun, still below the horizon, but already sending out its first promises of light and warmth, and he felt the land's eager anticipation for it. It was a symphony of sensation, and he was not just a listener, he was a part of the music. He rose and walked to the window, and the sight that met his eyes drew a soft, awestruck gasp from his lips. The world outside was not just restored, it was transcendent. The faint, worrying mist that had lingered for days was utterly gone, burned away by a golden, effulgent light that seemed to emanate from everything, from the blades of grass, from the leaves on the trees, from the very stones of the path. The colors were so vibrant they hurt to look at. The green of the pasture was a deep, emerald jewel. The red of the apples in the orchard glowed like rubies. The yellow of the rising sun was a liquid, blazing gold. The air that drifted through the window was so sweet and clean it felt like his first true breath. It was bursting with the scent of blooming flowers, ripe fruit, damp earth, and a pure, ozone freshness that spoke of life itself. He dressed quickly, a sense of joyous urgency propelling him. He practically flew down the stairs and out the front door, bursting onto the porch. The three women were already there, standing together, watching him with expressions of deep, serene satisfaction. They looked more vibrant, too, as if the renewed magic had poured energy back into them as well. He didn't need to speak. His wide-eyed wonder said everything. Alara simply smiled and gestured for him to go and see. His tour of the farm that morning was a pilgrimage of pure joy. He went to the well first. The water he drew up was not just clear. It was crystalline, sparkling in the sunlight as if filled with tiny diamonds, and it tasted cooler and more refreshing than any water he had ever drunk. He hurried to the barn. The dairy cow lowed a warm greeting, and when he sat to milk her, the milk flowed in a rich, abundant stream, filling the pail with its warm, creamy goodness. In the hen house, the hens were bustling and clucking, and the nesting boxes were filled with eggs, each one warm, brown, and perfect. He ran to the fields then, his feet barely touching the soft, lush grass. The plants were no longer hesitating. They were celebrating. The corn stood tall and proud, its stalks thick and strong, its leaves reaching for the sky. The vegetables in the garden were enormous, glossy, and perfect, seeming to have grown overnight. The very air hummed with fertility and abundance. It was more than he had seen on that very first day. It was as if the land, reassured of his love and commitment, was now pouring forth its bounty in a grateful, overflowing wave. He felt at his knees in the soft soil, not in despair, but in awe, letting the rich, living earth sift through his fingers. He was not just its owner. He was its keeper, its partner, its steward. He was part of it. Life on the farm settled into a new, perfect rhythm. Thomas worked every day, but the work was no longer a struggle. It was a dance. He knew when the rain was coming before the clouds gathered. He understood what a particular plant needed by a slight droop of its leaf. He communicated with the animals with a look, a touch, a feeling. He lived in harmony with Alara, Kayla, and Lyra, their bond a quiet, constant strength that underpinned every moment. He had learned the greatest lesson of all, that the most valuable things in life, trust, love, community, and the magic of nature itself, cannot be bought or demanded. They can only be grown, patiently and with care, from the seeds of respect, understanding, and a willing heart. He had come for a quiet farm, but he had found a living, breathing world and his place within it. We hope you enjoyed this tale of Thomas and the guardians of the land. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the importance of patience, respect, and building true connections, please let us know by giving a like. If you'd like to journey to other worlds and discover more magical lessons, be sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you know someone who would appreciate this story, please share it with them. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.